Welcome back to Vuln Vibes, everyone. Today we're going to be dissecting the latest WordPress vulnerabilities from our WP Safe blog. But we're doing things a little bit differently today. We know you all live and breathe IT security, so we're skipping Vulnerability 101 and diving straight into the deep end. Forget just listing out vulnerabilities. We're on the hunt for the most impactful trends, the patterns that make you go, wait a minute, that's happening a lot.
Exactly. Actionable insights, not information overload.
So let's get into it. We've been combing through a mountain of reports, and two major themes are screaming for attention. First up, and this one's a real head-scratcher, the sheer number of privilege escalation vulnerabilities. It's like someone left the back door wide open.
Yeah, it's a worrying trend, and not just because of the obvious implications. We're talking about situations where even low-level access things subscriber level could be exploited to gain significantly higher privileges.
Right. For example, the car dealer theme versions 1.6.4 and earlier actually allows subscribers to change the default user role. You can see how quickly things could go sideways with that kind of vulnerability.
Absolutely. Imagine an attacker just waltzing in as a subscriber and then bam, they're an admin with complete control over the site. And the car dealer theme isn't alone. The WHM Press WHMCS client area plugin has a similar flaw where subscribers can tamper with site options, potentially opening the door to a full-blown takeover.
It's like giving the keys to the castle to someone who just wandered in off the street. These examples really drive home the importance of defense in depth.
Couldn't agree more. We can't afford to treat low-privilege accounts as harmless. Every access level needs to be locked down tight.
Now, the second theme that jumped out at us is file inclusion vulnerabilities. This one is especially concerning because it can often be a stepping stone to remote code execution, the holy grail for attackers.
Yeah, it's all about exploiting weaknesses and how a web application handles external files. A clever attacker can trick the system into including and executing a malicious file, and that's game over. They're essentially in the driver's seat at that point.
And we're seeing this play out in both authenticated and unauthenticated scenarios, which is double trouble. Take the Traveler theme, for example. Versions 3.1.8 and earlier allow attackers with contributor-level access or above to execute arbitrary files on the server.
It's a sobering reminder that even seemingly safe file types can be weaponized. We're not just talking about executable files here. Attackers are getting incredibly creative in finding ways to bypass filters and security measures. Even a seemingly harmless image file could be manipulated to wreak havoc.
And when you factor in unauthenticated file inclusion vulnerabilities, things get even hairier. Take the WHM Press plugin again. Version 6.3 revision-0 and earlier have a vulnerability that allows unauthenticated attackers to exploit local file inclusion via the WordPress domain search stack's extended results function.
This particular vulnerability really underscores the importance of secure coding practices. Every single function that deals with file paths or includes needs to be scrutinized like a hawk. Any oversight can create an opening for attackers.
It really makes you realize how fragile things can be, right? One little slip-up in code can have massive repercussions. And speaking of slip-ups, we have to talk about this next one. It might not seem like a big deal on its own, but it highlights a disturbing trend. I'm talking about the PHP object injection vulnerability in the tags for WooCommerce plugin versions 1.0 and earlier.
Yeah, this one's fascinating because it's a perfect example of how a seemingly harmless flaw can become a serious problem when combined with other exploits. This vulnerability itself isn't directly exploitable. But if there's a pre-existing POP chain lurking somewhere, it could be the missing piece of the puzzle for an attacker.
Hold on, POP chain. For our listeners who haven't encountered that term before, can you break down what that means and why it's relevant here?
Of course. A POP chain, short for prototype pollution chain, basically allows an attacker to manipulate the properties of an object in a way that triggers unintended code execution. Think of it like a domino effect, where one seemingly small change sets off a chain reaction leading to something much bigger.
So in this case, the WooCommerce plugin doesn't have a known POP chain itself, but another plugin or theme installed on the site could.
Precisely. It's a stark reminder that we can't assess vulnerabilities in isolation. Attack chains are a real threat. And we need to be thinking about how these seemingly minor flaws could be strung together to create a much bigger problem.
That's a sobering thought. It's like those movies where villain patiently gathers all the pieces they need to pull off a grand heist. Except in this case, it's our websites that are on the line.
Exactly. We need to adopt a more proactive mindset and start thinking like the attackers. What are the potential attack chains? What seemingly innocuous vulnerabilities could be leveraged in unexpected ways? It's about seeing the bigger picture and anticipating those connections.
So we've covered these two major themes. privilege escalation, and file inclusion vulnerabilities. And we've talked about the growing threat of attack chains. What's the takeaway for our listeners? What can they do to stay ahead of the curve?
Well, the first and most obvious step is to keep everything updated. That includes your WordPress, core themes, and plugins. Patching those known vulnerabilities is absolutely critical. It's like locking your doors and windows. It's basic security hygiene.
Makes sense.
Huh?
But we can't just rely on updates alone, right?
Right. Another critical step is managing user roles and permissions carefully. The principle of least privilege is key here. Only grant users the access they absolutely need. It's all about limiting the potential damage if an account gets compromised.
So basically, don't hand out admin privileges like candy. And I imagine regular security audits and monitoring are important too, right?
Absolutely. Staying informed about emerging threats and vulnerabilities is crucial. There are excellent resources out there like the WP Scam Vulnerability Database and the WordPress Security blog. Knowledge is power, especially in the world of cybersecurity.
It's like they say, forewarned is forearmed. The more you know about potential threats, the better equipped you are to defend against them. But it's not just about absorbing information, right? It's about taking action.
You got it. Security is an ongoing process, not a one-time fix. We need to be vigilant, proactive, and adaptable. The threat landscape is constantly evolving, and so are the attackers.
I think that's a great point to emphasize. It can feel overwhelming at times. But simply being aware of these trends puts you miles ahead of the curve. You're already thinking about those less obvious attack vectors and questioning those seemingly minor flaws.
Exactly. You're not just reacting to threats, you're anticipating them. And that's a powerful position to be in.
So to wrap things up,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like we're seeing a kind of shift in the WordPress vulnerability landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Privilege escalation and file inclusion are popping up everywhere, and attackers are getting sneakier by exploiting seemingly minor flaws as part of these elaborate attack chains.
Yeah, it's a bit like that old saying, for want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. And for want of a horse, the rider was lost. One small vulnerability can lead to a cascade of consequences.
That's a great analogy, and it highlights the need for a holistic approach to WordPress security.
Exactly. We need to think beyond individual vulnerabilities and consider the bigger picture. How could these vulnerabilities be combined? What are the potential attack chains?
So as a WordPress user, what are some key takeaways to keep in mind?
First and foremost, keep everything updated, religiously. Second, be stingy with user permissions. Apply the principle of least privilege. And finally, never underestimate the importance of staying informed about emerging threats.
It sounds like vigilance is key here.
Absolutely. We need to be proactive, adaptable, and always on the lookout for those subtle clues that something might be amiss.
Well said. This has been a fascinating deep dive, and I think we've all learned a lot today. A big thank you to our expert for sharing their insights.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, stay vigilant out there, keep your WordPress site secure, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Vuln Vibes.